Next up, we have Lance Hosey. Lance Hosey is an acclaimed architect, author, advocate, and public speaker whose work focuses on new ways to improve the impact of design. He is presently the Chief Impact Officer at HMC Architects. Lance has authored 2 books, contributed to several others, and published hundreds of essays on design for the New York Times, the Washington Post, and many other media outlets, including monthly columns in the Huffington Post. He has spoken at TED and keynoted South by Southwest Eco. He has also won the American Institute of Architects Sarah Booth Conroy Prize and the Michael Khalil Endowment Smart Design Award.
Very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. Today, the topic of this talk is when buildings design themselves. 2 years ago, I wrote a series of articles for Building Design and Construction magazine based on a number of articles I've been writing for years about the role of automation in design and construction. Over the last few years, every major media outlet has published some kind of an essay with a provocative title having something to do with this. The robots are coming to take your job. One of the most widely cited studies on this topic is from Oxford University. It says that of all jobs, the risk of being automated within the next 15 years is about half. So nearly half of all jobs are subject to being stolen by computers. The job that is least likely to be replaced is telemarketers. So the reason why you're getting more and more robocalls is because they're easy to replace. The job least likely to be replaced, according to Oxford University, is something called a recreational therapist. I don't know what that is, but the study says that your job can be easily explained, it can be automated. The reason why recreational therapists probably won't be automated anytime soon is because nobody knows what it is, so it can't be easily explained. Now, when you turn this to my industry, design and construction, the same study estimated that the chance that construction will be fully automated is about 88%, so a very high percentage chance of being automated across the construction field. Already, we see a lot of stories like this of robots who are laying bricks and playing other roles on construction job sites. A decade ago, my friend Scott Howe, who works at the NASA JPL, says that there will come a day when no human labor is present on any construction site. There might be drones and other kinds of robots who are doing this kind of labor. What's interesting, though, is the same study, when it turned to architects, I'm an architect, so I have an interest in this question, says that while builders have an 88% chance of being replaced by robots, architects have less than a 2% chance of being replaced. Now, that study was in 2013. Today, there's actually a website called willrobotstakemyjob.com. You can enter any job and see what the chances of being automated are. You can see from the 2 most heavily searched topics that accountants and lawyers seem particularly anxious about whether they have job security. So naturally, as an architect, I entered architect and found that the same thing. So a decade later, they estimate, even with computers becoming more and more sophisticated, that architects have less than a 2% chance of becoming obsolete as a result of Terminator taking over our jobs. So they rate the automation risk level of architects as totally safe. Now, why is this? So, as I wrote in one of these essays that I mentioned from 2 years ago, can machines design? This is the basic question here. What is it that architects do that machines can't do? If machines can take over jobs on a construction site, why can't they take over our jobs when we're thinking ahead about how things are going to be built? Well, to answer the question whether machines can design, we have to answer the question what design is, which is a surprisingly elusive concept. Gary Hamel, who the Wall Street Journal calls the most important business thinker in America today, says that good design is like the Supreme Court's definition of pornography. We know it when we see it, which is pretty vague. Now, within my own industry, a decade ago, the American Institute of Architects for 3 days, got together some of the smartest architects in the country to ask this question: what is good design? If you read the report, it says lots of good observations, no consensus. So a lot of great ideas, but nobody could agree what good design is. So that leaves me with a question that's plagued me for years. If we can't say what good design is, how can we practice it? So, and I think the reason is that we think there's something mysterious about what architects do that keeps it safe from robots taking over. Daniel Davis, who's the former head of research for Autodesk, said as long ago as 6 years ago that it is for now, emphasis on the for now, impossible to get computers to think creatively. So what distinguishes architects from builders is that we think creatively, I guess. And yet 6 years ago, people also thought that robots were not capable of doing funky dances, and Boston Dynamics is proving that wrong. Kevin Kelly, who's one of the co-founders of Wired, wrote an incredible book called What Technology Wants. It says that robot replacement is just a matter of time in every field. He specifically calls out architecture as one of those fields that will not be safe. And the reason is this, that there's a burgeoning field of artificial creativity. That in fact, this is considered to be the next revolution in creativity is from AI. In fact, there have been lots and lots of examples, an incredible number of growing examples of machines creating art. Some of it is crap, but then so is some of human art. Ray Kurzweil, who's considered the guru of AI, basically says that by now computers are capable of approximating, or close to capable of approximating, the computational ability of one human brain. And by mid-century, computers will be capable of mimicking the computational ability of all human brains. The timeline he gives is this, that around now, that as I just showed you, creative AI is capable of making complex art and music. Within a decade, they'll be capable of learning how to create new knowledge without being asked to. And then within a decade or two after that, that AI will be billions of times more capable than biological intelligence. And finally, by mid-century, AI will surpass human beings as the single most smart and capable life forms. So if that's the case from the real experts on this, you return to that series of articles I wrote. We asked our readers, which is primarily architects and builders, about these questions. And one of the questions we asked is whether they feel that automation and AI are threats to job security in their field. Keep in mind that the definitive study says that builders are 88% likely to be replaced by robots. Architects only 2%. But over three-quarters of readers of building design construction 2 years ago said that essentially this would never happen, that it's not a threat to their job security, even though the experts in the field say that it is. So, at heart of this is this question: will AI ever match or exceed the intelligence or creativity of humans? And generally speaking, nearly 80% said no, that's not possible, even though, as I just showed you, Ray Kurzweil and many other experts, Kevin Kelly, say that it absolutely will happen. So what accounts for the disconnect? What's really fascinating here is the 20% gap between how builders answered that question and how architects answered that question. About 2/3, not quite 2/3 of builders say that computers will never match the intelligence and creativity of humans, but over 80% of architects did. So what is it about that? Do architects have less knowledge than builders do about the likelihood of this? Or is it that architects feel particularly insulated in their role? I think at the heart of this is that we tend to think of construction as a trade or a science that can be easily automated, whereas we think of architecture as an art and something that can't be automated easily. Some of the most famous architects who have ever lived have said that architecture is essentially art and nothing else. Fast forward to today, Santiago Calatrava says that architecture is not only an art, it's the most abstract of all arts. Which begs the question, what really is art? Like design, it's one of those sort of elusive terms, but far more elusive, in fact. But conventional wisdom is that art is really just about self-expression. You look at all the most popular sources on what art is. That's essentially what it boils down to. And some of the most celebrated architects alive say that the same thing, that architecture is art, and therefore architecture is self-expression, and that is the right of the architect. Possibly the most famous story ever told about an architect, the Fountainhead, is about that it is about the creative genius of the architect. So in a series of columns I wrote for Huffington Post several years ago, I took issue with this and said that I think that if architecture is self-expression, if art is self-expression, we shouldn't think of architecture as that, because architecture is meant first and foremost to serve the public. You can make a painting in your attic and no one ever has to stumble across it, but you can't avoid people using buildings in public space. But this idea is such anathema in our industry, but even just the headline alone angered a number of people. A respected design journalist I know, when I posted this on social media, she responded, "Claptrap." And I asked her whether she had actually read the essay, and she confessed that no, she hadn't. She was just responding to the headline. So the very idea that architecture might not be art is so antithetical to what we have been taught to believe that we dismiss the idea outright. Another friend of mine asked, well, if architecture is an art, what is it? And I said, I don't know that it needs to be compared to other fields or disciplines, but we tend to think of art and science as opposites. So what would happen if we thought of design more as a science and less of an art, meaning we have a methodical process that we use to get to a better outcome, which sounds very promising. But the reality is that this idea of the dichotomy between art and science is very old-fashioned. E.O. Wilson at Harvard says that, in fact, the difference between art and science and thinking of the two as different is a modern conceit, goes back to Descartes, and it is responsible for our challenging relationship with other living systems, meaning climate change and environmental degradation are primarily coming out of the fact that we think art and science is different. And until we close that gap, those relationships will remain challenging. This is the fundamental theme of my book, The Shape of Green, which came out in 2012. It basically presents a set of principles about the aesthetics of sustainable design, or more generally about how the standards of good design and green design should merge. We think of good design as an art, green design as a science, and we should blur the lines between those two things. Over the last decade or two, there's been a growing wealth of research into shape, color, pattern, texture, space, proportions, the designer's toolkit, and we're learning more and more about the virtually universal responses to these things. We know more about the science of aesthetics than we have ever in human history. Some of the most famous buildings really just boil down to simple proportions and geometry composition. That's math. And if it's math, it can be automated. Even the human face or other natural systems we deem to be beautiful are really a function of mathematical distances and ratios. This is what computers excel at. So why do we think they're not capable of such beauty? So there's been a lot of research in recent years into this, and that we're creating algorithms and other programs that can match beauty or understand beauty well enough, and therefore eventually, if not now, be able to create it in predictable ways. So in the end, what it really begs is, does design really need a designer? Some of the most compelling places that have been created by people can't hold a candle to some of the most compelling places there are. When you visit a place like this, you're just overwhelmed with its beauty in any number of ways. And unless you take a theological point of view, there was no designer involved with this. This is just genetic coding and environmental conditioning, which are things that computers can replicate. So when we look at the growth pattern of flowers, for instance, or other plants, again, it's just genetic coding and environmental conditioning, which is something that arguably eventually we can recreate, not in order to mimic or recreate biological life, but certainly to be able to create designs that are of such profound beauty that they're indistinguishable from other natural systems. Already there have been lots and lots of examples of studying self-assembly and artificial creativity in ways that Humans are creating the conditions for these things to arise, but we're not determining directly exactly what form these things take. So when we look into nature and we see all these incredibly profound and resilient places, and the arrogance of us thinking that only we can create great design, but then what we give back to nature tends to look and feel like this. Vast majority of human-made landscapes look like this, to the point where we have to ask whether designers are even capable of addressing the simplest of challenges of our time. The biggest challenge of our time, arguably climate change, is one that we are not tackling particularly well. Conventional wisdom holds that cars and factories are responsible for carbon emissions, but by and large, the lion's share of it comes from buildings. And yet we're not really addressing this very well. The American Institute of Architects, which is the leader of my profession, for the last decade has asked architects to submit their numbers on how they're doing on certain climate action targets. Now keep in mind that about 200 firms out of the maybe 20,000 firms in the US actually submit these numbers. So it's maybe 1% or less of all architects are figuring into these numbers. And arguably they're the leading edge, the people who are actually studying these things and people who care about these things. So, and you can see that they're not really moving the needle very far. When you compare that to what the actual targets have been, we're nowhere near where we need to be. There's a fundamental gap between even the leading edge of architecture and addressing the fundamental challenge of our time. So in conclusion, in that same survey, when we asked whether readers thought that AI is capable of better design and construction, 83% said yes. And yet when we asked whether better buildings created artificially would justify job loss in our industry, they're torn. Just over half said yes. So 83% say, the vast majority of readers, architects, and builders say that AI is capable of creating better places in all the different ways I just showed you. And yet they're really torn about whether they should be doing that if it threatens our jobs. So in the end, I'm left with a basic question: which is more important, architects or architecture? Thank you.
What a great session. Thank you, Lance. Next up, we have Vernon Johnson. Dr. Vernon Johnson is an accomplished and results-oriented professional with hands-on experience in diversity and inclusion, program coordination, organizational leadership, and community health. He is an expert at providing direction, counseling, and recommendations on diversity and inclusion, professional development, and developing and promoting an inclusive environment and culture. Vernon attended Southern Illinois University, Carbondale for his bachelor and master's degrees in healthcare management and public health. Vernon also has a certificate in diversity and inclusion from Cornell University. Dr. Johnson received his doctorate in organizational leadership at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. Please join me in welcoming Vernon to the stage.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Patricia. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Veron Johnson. I'm super excited to be here with you all today and sharing some things around diversity and inclusion and infusion into technology and innovation and ideation, which all definitely goes hand in hand. So I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation here and go ahead and get us started. So again, my name is Vernon Johnson, and diversity and inclusion for me has been more so an opportunistic career pathway than a planned one. And, sometimes you have people who, they say they're going to be a doctor, they go to school to be a doctor, and thus they become a doctor, right? And then you have people like myself who go to school for healthcare management, go and get your master's in public health, and then get your doctorate in organizational leadership with very much HR in mind. And so, everyone's career path is different. And I would just say that mine has definitely been more fueled by my passions around healthcare, youth development, and diversity and inclusion really being the common denominator of all those different experiences. Recently, I came on board to Brookfield Properties, which is a worldwide real estate organization, and very much thrilled and honored and privileged to be a part of the organization. I was bought on at the onset of the very volatile year that we had in 2020. Not only, with COVID-19 happening, but also social injustice and racial unrest happening throughout our country. And so it really, was a defining moment, not only for me as a professional, but I think for the entire country and world, that racism, social injustice, systematic oppression are things that organizations need to address now and going forward. And the thing is that we have to recognize that organizations are these pillars and communities that really help, that can really help to thrive and push the needle forward. And what I mean by that is that, we have gone, when we think about our workforces, for example, we have gone from very much a strength-based economy where, your worth was predicated on how strong you were in terms of the work output. Then it moved to more of a knowledge-based economy, which I believe that we're still in. And I think we're moving towards a different arena, which is an emotionally intelligent workforce, where people really want to have psychological safety in the workplace as a means of bringing their authentic and best selves to work and being productive. Because what people are doing and saying is that if you don't have diversity and inclusion at your organization, if you're not taking it serious, I'm not going to come and work at that organization, right? They're going to go elsewhere. And people really are leaving organizations and are losing top talent because of that. And when you have people who leave, especially from diverse backgrounds, you're losing innovation and ideas and creativity for your organization, which is so key and important for companies and for our society, period. So what I'm going to kind of talk about here today is a few things, really just kind of diving into diversity and inclusion as a whole, talk about some of the things that we're kind of doing on our end, and then really looking at the current climate of things and some things in the workplace that really impact employees. And I'll kind of talk about some of the other things that we're doing programmatically. So what I would love for everyone to do is to think about a high school dance that you attended, whether it be homecoming, turnabout, prom, some type of social, whatever it may have been. And I want you to think about, the fun that you had at that dance, right? Did you go out there and actually dance? Did you go with your friends? I really want you to think about that, right? And I really love this analogy by Renee Meyers, who is actually one of my mentors, and she's the current head of diversity and inclusion at Netflix. And I had the privilege of working with her at my previous organization on a diversity and inclusion event for our employees. And she has this quote, which is, diversity is going to the dance and inclusion is being asked to dance. So it's not just enough for me to go and be present, but I also need to be a part of the mix. I need to be engaged, involved, and have a good time just like everyone else. And I think with that type of mindset, we can truly build out an inclusive workforce and an inclusive environment for people so that they can feel respected, connected, and valued and able to bring their authentic selves. And it really starts in how we define diversity and inclusion. And I think we have oftentimes heard of all the different terms and things like that. And I think people group things together and they don't really understand that diversity and inclusion is really a journey. And diversity is really about the mix, and inclusion is making the mix work. So when you think about the diversity, we think about all of the differences of who we are. Simply stated, everyone is unique. And inclusion, creating the environment where everyone feels respected, connected, a sense of belonging, valued, and able to bring their authentic selves to work to better serve our business. Essentially, everyone's contributions are valued. So we don't want to disregard people. We don't want to make people feel small or inadequate or that their ideas don't matter. We want to be able to bring that to the forefront and have a discussion around it and bring that forward, because that is really inherent and puts the organization at a competitive advantage by having those insights being taken into account. And, at Brookfield, we really wanted to establish a strategy as well around our diversity and inclusion efforts. And we've really kind of put them in these three different buckets. Inclusive culture. So there we really think about our computer-based trainings. We think about our employee resource group program, where people with different affinities can get together and be able to share things around culture, community, commerce, and career. And really bring forward the authenticity of that organization or of that ERG to the organization as a valuable asset. Diverse teams. How do we recruit for diverse talent into the organization? This is so important, and you have to have a strategy that really focuses on two things. One, ready now talent, so the current acquisitions that you're bringing into your organization, and then future talent. How are you really preparing, the future talent engine of the future with your talent efforts in terms of internships, in terms of keeping candidates warm and engaging them later on? All those different things are important. And then you think about the diverse strategic partnerships that align with those different affinity groups to really bring in a diverse workforce. And then diverse talent brand. How are you perceived out by candidates in terms of your diversity and inclusion efforts? This is really important, especially when it comes to social media, your career websites. When you think about the images, do you have an adequate look into your workforce in terms of its diversity? And if not, those are things that you have to rectify, because people will go onto those different sites and see what you're about. And if they're not really diverse, they may not feel like there's a place for them. So this is a really cool thing that we have done, or an example of kind of the diverse talent brand, which is LinkedIn background images. So we have a diverse subset of employees in the background. And it's pretty cool. We have one here where they have the mask on, which might be our new normal and going forward. But it's really just a great way to remind folks that we're one, as well as to showcase the folks that we really do value diversity and inclusion in our organization, and we are advocates of that. Another aspect of learning that we're doing is a D&I Ally and Learn series. And what we'll be doing is showcasing these different documentaries. So the first one being Alzheimer's, a love story that focuses on a Chicago gay married couple. And one of the gentlemen's, his husband is suffering from Alzheimer's, and it goes through the journey of that experience. Now, why that's important is because we really understand the intersectionality that is taking place here of gender, of being a caretaker, in all those different aspects, also being older, and really looking into depth into that. And really, it's meant to charge these three different areas of empathy, curiosity, connection, and then having a courageous conversation where people really can bring out the value and learn a lot more. So this just kind of brings us all to what is going on in our current climate here today. And we really have to think about these different areas, right? And I love this example of this cartoon where this gentleman has regular anxiety. He's given COVID anxiety. And then, with the elections last year, he had election anxiety, and then all these other different anxieties and different things that are happening in the world that really become overwhelming for a lot of folks. And when we think about that, we have to think about our employees in terms of the different things that they are facing and how we can help to alleviate that. So America's in turmoil, and there's a lot of different things that have happened that I mentioned earlier from last year that are still going on. A quick note on COVID-19. The disparities in deaths have traumatically impacted the African American Latino communities, which is something that has not been talked about as much. And that is just something added on to the structural inequality and broader systematic racism that our society is facing. Also, there's high levels of unemployment. And we have to really realize that the caveat here is that there will be a huge pool of talent for a lot of organizations to pull from. So it's really a great opportunity for organizations to focus on bringing diverse talent into their organizations post this pandemic. And then, of course, in recent memory, the January 6th desecration of the United States Capitol, which this image of, these images I never thought we would ever see in our lifetime. And unfortunately, we did. So this just kind of brings us back to this idea of what is going on in the workplace. And this is just an example here from Catalyst and a woman who gave her testimony, which basically she says that, hey, I have to basically stay on my on my P's and Q's in the workplace, and I cannot afford to slip up or fail, because if I do, it could be the end of me at this organization. An added pressure that a lot of people of color, in particular Black women, can feel in the workplace, which is just really this added pressure, this added culture of perfection and things of that nature that really can be detrimental. Here we have an example of a Pakistani Muslim woman who was being judged, who finally just resigned from the workplace because it was just too much added pressure and just a lack of respect. And so, it's really telling, when you have real people giving these testimonies of different situations that they've been facing in the workplace around unconscious and implicit bias that is taking part. So at our organization, we started a D&I employee advisory group, and this started, at the onset of the murder of George Floyd, which happened on May 25th of 2020, where employees just said, you know what, we have to do something. We need a permanent resource around diversity and inclusion. We need ERG groups, and we need to have diversity and inclusion integrated into the organization so that every corner of the organization that you go, diversity and inclusion is there. And that is where I kind of came on board to really help the organization progress and really reveal this throughout the organization. So our employee resource group, we have 8 employee resource groups at the organization currently. And really they're to ensure that they're aligned to business goals. And we operate under a framework, which I think is really important for organizations to do, because it really provides the guidance for the different events that the ERGs do. So this framework was discovered by Dr. Robert Rodriguez, who's a business psychologist, and he basically coined out these 4 C's of culture, where essentially the ERG would educate employees about that particular dimension of diversity. Career, provide professional development opportunities for members of the ERG, as well as assist HR in their talent outreach efforts. Community, giving back to community, especially if that community revolves around that particular dimension of diversity, i.e. we have a veterans group, and they, are looking to give back to veteran centers and veteran homeless shelters and things of that nature. Commerce is really about supporting the already company approved and driven initiatives that are currently in play. And so those, basically you would have ERG members who would pub those different things and really get those things out across to the community. So one of the things that we really needed to implement when I got on board was really a structure around our diversity and inclusion efforts. So for the ERG program in particular, we planned out these different roles where we had an executive sponsor, we had myself, we had chairperson, vice chair, and secretary, which are employee volunteered roles and positions. And what's great about this is that having the executive sponsors are elemental to this, because what they do is they provide kind of a microphone to their organizations and to the rest of the organization when these different ERG events are happening throughout the year, which is super important. And then having this, the chair, vice chair, secretary is important because they really help to formulate those different events, lead committees, really, begin to have those conversations to plan around their particular activities. And what we've done for each of the ERGs is have them to adopt the Heritage Month so that they can go ahead and do an event or two during that month. And what happens is from all the way from Black History Month down to, Native American History Month, you have all these different events happening by the ERGs throughout the entire year. And you're basically having this ongoing diversity and inclusion programming, which is wonderful to see. We also implemented a SharePoint site internally that has all of our D&I programs in there and information. It's important that people have technology resource to go to. We also leverage Microsoft Teams in order to do that as well, so that the different ERGs can communicate to one another, which is super important. And really at the heart of this is, innovation, ideation, and really leveraging that to really bring us to a new space and new frontier. And what I mean by that is that, one of the things that we've always talked about is, leveraging design thinking in particular as a means of a universal diversity inclusion, organizational way to solve issues and challenges. So as many know, design thinking leverages the art of empathy as a means of helping to solve issues that folks in the IT realm may be experiencing. But I believe everyone can leverage that. So to give you a quick example, we have a internship program called Accelerate, where we employ college students, community college students into our organization. And so before we had a GPA requirement and things like that, and we wanted to get some feedback post the internship from those students. And one of the bits of feedback that they gave us was that, they would love to recommend the program to some of their peers, but felt like they wouldn't be good candidates because we had kind of a high GPA requirement. So we actually went back, did some research, collaborated with those folks who gave us that feedback. And we actually changed our GPA requirement to say, just in good standing, so we got rid of the 3.2 or 3.3 or whatever we had on there and just said, we would like for you to be in good standing. And what that does is it promotes a more inclusive, requirement so that students can feel more at ease and be able to, be a part of this internship and not have to worry about, a GPA requirement that may not be telling of their character and just who they are as a person. So really excited by leveraging design thinking as a means of really, employing kind of an organizational way to tackle challenges and issues for the company. So like I mentioned, we have 8 ERGs. So we have HERD, which focuses on Hispanic Latinx employees, our Pride Network, our Engaging Intergenerational Team. So this is a group that really focuses on the intergenerational workplace, which is something that a lot of organizations may not pay attention to as much because it's not a phenotypical characteristic where basically you kind of see something and you are kind of applying it to a certain group. So this is great because within the next 10 years, our workforce is going to be completely integrated with Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, and so forth. And so it's really important to know some of the characteristics of those different generational groups and to really harvest that talent so that you can really create a cohesive workplace. Ability focuses on disability inclusion for the workplace. Brookfield Black Professionals, HEART, helping Asian Americans reach togetherness, Brookfield Women's Network, and then Supporters of Military Families and Veterans. All wonderful groups and really important, especially when we think about that 4C model in terms of really harnessing an inclusive environment for everyone. So these are just some business objectives. You know, we want to make sure that we have business integration, employee engagement, communication, brand outreach, and professional development. So it's really about ensuring that resources are paid attention to those internally, and then that helps us to, to invest and do so externally as well. We really feel like diversity and inclusion is really about managing, two different core things of information and people, and it's really about making better heads, hearts, and hands in terms of the different work that we do and the relationships that we have both internally and externally, and ensuring that we have success all around. So I just wanted to showcase the different heritage months here this year, so you can kind of see how the programming is kind of done here. So each ERG would adopt one of these months, and then they would do 1 to 2 events during the month. And then for some of the groups who don't have a heritage month, such as the Engaging Intergenerational Teens group, they would go ahead and adopt a month that has an NA next to it and do their programming for that selected month. So without further ado, I just would love to thank you for your time here today. This has been wonderful, and I hope that this presentation and some of the thoughts that I shared are helpful for you and your organization. Thank you.
What a great session. Thank you, Vernon. That's it for today's general session. We're going to take a short break, and then at 2:30 Eastern time, the tracks will begin. We have 3 tracks today: project delivery, future of building, and design innovation, where we'll be taking a deep dive into industry trends. All tracks have world-class speakers, so you can't go wrong. Enjoy.